be no doubt that life is about to get, I'm afraid, tougher. You know what's happening to your food prices and your fuel prices. And there's the fact that it is very, very difficult for younger people to get jobs. We may be looking at a generation of people who get into work very seldom, maybe a few months a year if they're lucky. Phelisa Nkomo is a developmental economist. She is with Oxfam South Africa, board chair, in fact, of Oxfam South Africa. Phelisa, good afternoon to you. We've been watching our economy, well, lose jobs for many years. In fact, the number of people who are unemployed in our country has been going up, I suppose, since the 1970s, apart from maybe a small period in the 2000s. Where would you start? What would be the first thing you would do to help grow our economy?
Well, I mean, perhaps the starting point is the unemployment stats that came out last week. It gives interesting, kind of like positive results, and perhaps the starting point, what that signals is that there are several sectors that we need to pay attention to, particularly those who have actually contributed in the decrease of 0.8%. I think that's a starting point. I think the second issue is to really focus on the agricultural sector. You would note, Stephen, that in fact the agricultural sector in the last 5 to 6 years, in fact, when we've been, our GDP growth has been less than 2%, one of the, key economic sector that has been driving this economy, or that's been a glue, has been the agricultural sector. And it is a concern that it's actually on the decline, or it's on the negative. We need to pay attention to that, because I think for me that's important. I think the third element is to turn this country into a construction site, where, for instance, you make it sure that you roll out every infrastructural program that is on the pipeline right now, and get South Africans and young people working, and women. So the statistics actually shows that 40% of black women, for example, lead disengaged life, unproductive, they don't earn an income. And obviously that indicates that's a very strong indication around income inequality, social inequality. Young people are sitting at 62.5%, for instance, right, of unemployment, disengaged. And that's really a social instability, by the way, because it's something that actually is concerning. So, and I think from the stats report already signals that there are two sectors which are actually government-driven, which is the public works program and as well as community service program. I think, with all its limitations, I don't want, because all South Africans want to actually have access to a decent work, decent income, live a decent life, and be productive, right? And earn an income without having to stand in the queues of social security. So one of the key issues, the fourth issue we actually need to do, is to actually start dispatching the capacity that is sitting within government in the national departments, and dispatching is to local government to assist with the implementation of the infrastructure program. So in the budget speech, and the minister actually, amongst the key things that he announced was that they were sitting with almost 57 billion within the infrastructure fund that has not been tapped into, that has not been utilized. So I do think that, I think the point I'm trying to unpack here is that the fiscal policy tools are within the disposal of the government to make it sure that it gets this country working, and then start concentrating on other areas where, for example, they might require a little bit of time in as far as coordination. So one of the key issues I raised is that we need to change the economic architecture of this country. So government, for example, had come out and spoken about structural reforms in the form of regulation. But there's another leg of structural reforms that we've not even been able to touch in this country, is the fact that at a firm level, a lot of South African companies are actually, exporting primary produce goods. So according to data of UNIDO, the indication is that South Africa has lost its industrial intensity by almost 17% between 2000 and 2019. And that also indicates that we actually don't know our industrial capacity as an economy. So there needs to be a coordination at that level between government and actually private sector. So if I make an example, for instance, the steel sector is actually connected to almost between 7 to 8 economic sectors. But currently we still do import some of the finished goods that are actually manufactured from the steel sector, with some of them are linked to the healthcare sector, are linked to the dentistry sector, some of them are linked to the construction sector, for instance. And so what it means is that, in fact, by not investing in our industrial capacity, we continue to make our economy quite vulnerable. Now, Stephen, these proposals are not coming for the first time. Actually, we've raised them in the last 5 to 10 years, and now would have been in a much more better position with the Ukrainian-Russian crisis that would have a less export-led economy, but a much more employment-led economy.
Sorry to interrupt you, Phelisa. I mean, one of the problems, you talk about infrastructure, for example, and this gets to the capacity of the state. I mean, for years, I remember President Zuma outlining infrastructure plan after infrastructure plan, and yet at the same time, 2 of our major big engineering companies, civil engineering companies, went into business rescue. I think certainly at least one of them did, because they didn't have enough government projects. We look around us and you can see a pothole in, virtually every road. And that goes to the capacity of the state to actually fix infrastructure. Is that part of the problem, how we actually do a project?
Well, I mean, yes, and I think part of it has to do with the fact that local government actually does not have capacity. And a lot of capacity is sitting with national government and provincial government. Hence, my first point was part of strengthening the state. You actually need to be able to get to release some of that capacity at a national level and take it straight to local government in particular. And part of the reason has to do with the fact that, every society evolves. So South Africa is not the South Africa which is the post-constitutional democracy where it inherited in 1994. It's a society that has evolved. And now you need to think about what type of capacity you need for you to actually deliver the services, that the citizens require. You talk about potholes. At least with potholes, we're not dying. I went to see a farm, yesterday, and one of these, I think it's the Jeste River, but, in the south of Johannesburg. I mean, it's stinking, and part of it has to do with the fact that communities that live along the river are not serviced, right? So meaning that they get to use the water for drinking, for pollution facilities, but as well as cleaning their clothes, right? Now, the key issue there is that it means that, municipalities are unable to cope, part of it, particularly in the cities, are unable to cope with rapid urbanization. And part of it as well as they lack the agility to move faster. In fact, what has happened within this social evolution I'm referring to is that citizens are setting the pace in as far as what is it that government is doing, which is probably one thing, but also from an execution perspective is that government is actually caught off guard because in essence it actually doesn't know how to deal with some of these rapid urbanization issues, and they're putting a lot of pressure on within local government. So hence I'm saying that there is capacity, but dispatch capacity, but also deal with inefficiencies. Just my last point around capacity, deal with inefficiencies of repetition of deliverables between national government, provincial government, and the local government. Because in essence, it means that we're actually sitting with the same government, but also doing different things, but to fulfill political interest, but at the expense of the citizens.
Phelisa Nkomo, I do have to leave it there. Thank you so much. Development economist and board chair of Oxfam South Africa. I do appreciate the time.